and welcome to New Jersey Politics with Laura Jones. I am Laura Jones, and we're so glad to have you here. In recent weeks, officials in New Jersey confirmed that a software error at the Motor Vehicles Commission improperly transmitted the information of thousands of non-citizens who had indicated they were not eligible to vote into the statewide voter registration system. Roughly 5,100 of those registrations have now been deleted, with more than 1,000 others still under review. This has raised questions about election integrity, government oversight, and how state leaders should respond. Standing by is former state legislator John Wisniewski. First, New Jersey has become the first state to enact comprehensive statewide voting rights protections in the wake of a recent U.S. Supreme Court decision, with Governor Mikey Sherrill signing the John R. Lewis Voter Empowerment Act into law. Joining me now is Assemblywoman Verlina Reynolds-Jackson, one of the key legislators who helped pass the John R. Lewis Voter Empowerment Act. Assemblywoman, welcome. So good to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm glad to be on New Jersey Politics.
Oh, we are happy to have you. Now, you've called this one of the strongest state voting rights acts in the country. So can you talk about the specific provisions that make New Jersey's law stand out compared to those in other states?
Well, we have a lot of strong voting protections in there. Language access was part of it. It was really important that we had that in there. Also, access to the ballot. The pre-clearance was also very important to us. And working within the Division of Civil Rights so that voters had protections. That was all very, very important to us. Making sure voters had a place to go if and when something goes wrong.
Right, and because people they don't know what they don't know. They don't know what to do, right?
Right.
Yeah, so let's talk about, you talk about pre-clearance. So the law requires certain jurisdictions to get the Attorney General to approve before changing election rules. So can you talk about what that means? That might be kind of confusing to some people. How does this pre-clearance process work in practice, and which communities do you expect it to protect the most?
So, great question. It's going to protect people all over, right? But particularly in Black and brown communities, we want to make sure that if you had a problem in the past, you would have to go before the court. You would have to go through a process to make sure that you're not harming communities of color. So we want to make sure that, we're not moving polling locations, or we're not moving drop boxes. We want to make voting as easy as possible. And so those are just a few examples that would go through a pre-clearance problem if you had one. But what we did, we worked with all of our election officials to make sure that everybody starts off with a clean slate. So this isn't a pre-penalty. Nobody's in the penalty box. But right now, we want to just make sure if you have, you want to move a place or you want to close a place, that there is some type of provision that you go through before you can do that.
Yeah, New Jersey has a lot of ways that you can vote, but you've just now said that you're hoping this law will protect Black voters and other voters of color more so under the state law that currently federal protections. So why was that urgent, considering what happened at the federal level, the U.S. Supreme Court, and that recent decision? Can you talk a little bit about that? Bring our viewers up to speed.
Great point. When the federal courts took away that pre-clearance part, that was the heart of the 1965 Voter Rights Act, right? That was the part where you had to go to court. You had to make sure that we were protecting voters. When they changed that, that just gutted the whole thing. And what I'm so proud of, the governor, Mikey Sherrill, was able to say, we're going to protect New Jersey voters. We're going to make sure that they have this pre-clearance that we're going to go through. And the governor's office, the administration, the attorney generals, all of the advocates, over 65 different advocacy groups worked with us on this to make sure that we made sure that we did it correctly. And I think that's extremely important to highlight, making sure that the voters were at the top of the list, because oftentimes they're the last one that we consider when we make public policy.
Yeah. So the legislation expands language assistance. So that helps people who may not read English, which some people might think, why do you need that? But especially when you have a ballot question, that can be really important. But it's also creating a statewide public election database. So can you talk about those tools? How it's helping everyday New Jersey voters? And again, when you're getting to some of the more diverse communities.
It's so important. If English isn't your first language, why shouldn't I be able to have the ballot in my native language, right? And so we use the census data in order to recognize those groups, those areas of populations. I could tell you Spanish was like the number one. Mm-hmm. And so we want to make sure that you can read the ballot in your language. But number two, to make sure that there's also someone there that can be able to help you. Or what does that look like if I walk in and I don't have that access? Making sure that those election officials have the resources that they need. But also, your question around the database. We don't have, everybody does it differently. All the counties do it differently. They collect data, but we don't have a database to be able to say, well, listen, in Mercer County, our rolls were at 100,000. And then last year they were at 50,000. We don't have a centralized place where we can keep it and be able to look at the numbers as they come in. So that was extremely important. I've served on a number of board of canvassers, and to get that information about how do we store it afterwards is extremely important. And I think that we can learn a lot from that as well.
What do you say for some of the critics who may argue that the stronger voting right laws here in New Jersey can complicate election administration, or it's just an invitation to more lawsuits? How do you respond to those concerns while prioritizing access and integrity?
Oh, thank you for the question. I think New Jersey is one of the strongest states around voting rights. And this John Lewis Voter Empowerment Act of New Jersey has made it so that New Jersey is protected. States are independent, and this is going to be able to say no federal oversight can come here to govern how we run our elections here. And that was extremely important.
Yeah. Civil rights advocates spent a lot of time. They spent years pushing for this bill. Can you talk about the toughest obstacles in getting it across the finish line, and what role grassroots organizations played?
Oh my, I would say the toughest part probably was where we were going to put the voter protection at. The public defender's office is currently housed in Treasury. Mm-hmm. And so we thought maybe it would go over to Treasury. But then after we talked to the Attorney General's office, they said, hey, we are the Division of Civil Rights, and it should be housed here. And we're going to put some protection walls up so that we can make sure that voters have a place to go, and we won't be sharing attorneys and things like that. But it took us a minute to get there. But I thank all of the advocates. And when I tell you, we work with the New Jersey Institute of Social Justice, the NAACPs, the League of Women Voters, Conservation Voters, NJBIC. I'm going to get in trouble because I'm going on and on. But there's a lot of individuals, right, that shared their stories about how access to the polls, was denied, or that it was hard, or maybe it was at a former police location. It's like, I'm not going there, And I was like, yeah, why would we make a voting location at a police station? And so we have to look at those things. And those, sometimes they are used to intimidate people, where people may have those fears. But, having the awareness, knowing how we're going to move forward, brings me so much comfort to know that voters are protected and they have a place to go when issues arise. And access, safety, and being able to do it every 6 months here in New Jersey.
Yeah,
be able to go to the polls.
Right. And in New Jersey, we joke that it should be called the election state, because there's always seems to be every year there's an election in New Jersey. And then, there was a time when we had the school board elections were different than the fire elections, different than municipal, different than other elections, and on it went. As we were just talking about, so many grassroots organizations have been really working at getting this enacted for a long time. Governor Sherrill and others, though, have said, this is absolutely a direct response to federal threats to voting rights. So how do you see New Jersey's actions influencing other states, or perhaps the national conversation?
Oh, thank you so much for that question. We're a leader. We're a strong leader being able to do this in New Jersey. I think we're a model for other states to look at how we did it, how New York did it, how Virginia did it, to say we want to make sure that New Jersey is protected from federal laws. And so I look forward to working with anybody that would like to do it in their state as well.
Yeah. So looking ahead, what are the next steps for implementing the law? Now, how do you monitor whether it's being delivered in real protections for voters in your district, across the state?
Well, we have to give them a little bit of time, right? So some things we can implement right away, but others, the database and making sure we have the pre-clearance part set up, that's not going to happen until next year because we have an election coming up in November. So we understand that it takes time to make sure that our election officials have the proper timing to be able to put everything in place. But I'm excited that, we are protected here in New Jersey. We don't have to share our voter files. The governor is strong in her spot where she says, no, take me to court, and we won. And so we have to continue to protect voters in our database as well.
And then while this is a separate issue, motor vehicles, there was an error in the software code in the governor's office. There were people who weren't supposed to vote who were put onto the voter rolls. So I think voting in general, with this law that was just signed and also what happened at motor vehicles, voting protection, the integrity of voting is very much on people's minds. And we've spoken to past lieutenant governors who have also served as Secretary of State about all the ways you can vote in New Jersey, whether it's early voting, vote by mail, vote day of. Like, the state really is doing a lot to ensure that people can access this. And now with this that is now signed into law, can you just talk about how you feel going into the November election, not only for protection for people trying to vote, people of color, can you just talk about the ways to vote and people who are engaged, getting people not just registered but out to vote and this is a right that people have died for,
Right.
and other countries, don't have these rights. They are precious rights.
They are precious rights. And I think it's really about making sure we connect why government is important and things that government does, right? So we talk about housing and education, all of these things, economic development, all the resources that our state put in. But voting by mail is extremely important. It's easy, it's safe. Whether you go early voting, I love souls to the polls when we have our churches to be able to go as a congregation and vote early, or if you choose to vote on election day. I think the important part is that you know where your polling location is and you make a plan. So sometimes we're traveling, sometimes we may work 24-hour shifts. So we have 3 different ways that you can always participate, and it's extremely important that we do that. And so I also like to highlight, for our disabled population, making sure that those polling locations are accessible to them, making sure that they can go in, they can have access to the ballot, make sure they cast their vote, and then they can come out. Voting should be easy. It shouldn't take you miles to get there. They should open on time and they should close on time as well. So I look forward to working with our Lieutenant Governor on this and our Governor, Mikey Sherrill, to make sure that voting is easy, safe, and accessible for everyone.
Assemblywoman, thank you so much for taking the time to explain a little bit about this act and some of the safeguards that are in place. We appreciate seeing you and your time.
Oh, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Welcome back. New Jersey has deleted roughly 5,100 voter registrations after state officials say an MVC software error improperly added non-citizens who had said they were ineligible to the rolls. More than 1,000 cases remain under review, raising fresh questions about election integrity and state oversight. Former New Jersey State Legislator John Wisniewski joins us now. Assemblyman, good to see you.
Laura, good to be with you. Thank you.
Yep. Well, it's a big story that was breaking a couple weeks ago in Trenton. But from your experience, let's talk about the seriousness of this MVC registration error for public confidence in the state. And also the administration, Mikey Sherrill's response so far, is it matching the scale of the problem?
Yeah, I think her response is absolutely spot on. This is a problem that needs to be fixed. Lesson 101 in political leadership is when you identify a problem, be transparent about it, talk about it, explain what's going to happen, how it's going to be fixed, and that's what she's done. This is a problem that originated during the Murphy administration, in which two pieces of legislation essentially crossed, and they were not really totally compatible and were not administered properly. The good news is that it was identified, and the good news is that it's fixed. It's a tempest in a teapot. You never want to have errors, but when you do, you want to correct them. And just to put it in perspective, the number registered is 0.1% of the total voter rolls, and the number that actually voted is 1,000th of 1% of all those who voted. So it's not a big. It's not a problem that made a difference.
Right. It's a problem because it shouldn't happen. But when you look, it did not skew the election. Right. That I think a lot of people, that's a big concern, because when you look at the governor's election, it's like, wow, we had Jack Ciattarelli having bigger numbers than he did the first time. So people's minds immediately go to, okay, was there, because some of the numbers didn't necessarily match up. But that has not been the case, correct?
Yeah, it was 400 votes statewide. When you think about there being over 550 municipalities, that's less than one vote per town. And so statistically insignificant, but as you correctly pointed out, a problem that needs to be corrected, and it is being corrected as we speak. As you mentioned in the intro, over 5,000 of those improperly registered individuals have been removed from the voter rolls, and the process continues, and others will likely be removed as well.
So I want to talk about, you said this was something that happened under the Murphy administration, as Governor Sherrill's administration has described it as a software failure. And, they're moving to delete the bulk of the improper registrations. So, what exactly happened under the Murphy administration? What action should they take to clean up the rolls? Because, as a parent, one thing that surprised me when my kids got their driver's license, I didn't realize was going to happen. And it was also with my daughter, it was during COVID, so I couldn't go in with her to get the license, is when you go through to get your driver's license, that's just one of the questions. Do you want to register? And you can register there. And I was a little disappointed, not that she registered, but I wanted to take her once she turned 18 to register to vote. So can you just talk a little bit about what the system is? And you said it's happened under the Murphy administration. What was the foul up?
Yeah, the foul up unintentional, but one was let's get more people registered to vote. Everybody in New Jersey, we're a highway state. Everybody needs a driver's license, or just about everybody. So what's one way to get as many people registered is to make it part of the motor vehicle process, which was a smart idea. Let's get as many registered as possible.
And other states do this as well. New Jersey's not the only state to do. This
is by far not unique. As a matter of fact, up until that point in time, New Jersey was an outlier. Other states have been doing this for years. And the other issue was that while you may not have full status, people who are here and are not citizens but are here working legally, they need a driver's license. Otherwise, there's a potential, and we've seen this in the past, where the necessity, economic necessity, outweighs the legal concern, and people would drive anyway. So there was legislation passed that enabled people who are not citizens to get New Jersey driver's license, and that's where the software did not take into account these inconsistent goals. So while you get somebody a driver's license so they are legal and they have insurance while they're operating a motor vehicle, you have to make that exception that they cannot, under any circumstances, be registered, and they were accidentally registered. And certainly this was a problem, a failure of oversight. Somebody should have put two and two together and said, hey, we need to look out for this. A failure of software, whoever the software company was really should be taken to task for not identifying this potential glitch. And so it really didn't get, the Murphy administration, whether they were aware of it, I don't know, but certainly the Sherrill administration has correctly identified it and is taking the steps to correct it.
Yeah, I mean, she was right out there, right away, right when the news broke with, discussing that and, going directly to, constituents. But what clear, direct messaging do you believe the people of New Jersey, what do they need to hear from the governor about this incident when it comes to accountability, transparency, reassurance that this is being taken care of and it is not going to happen? Like what do they need to communicate and how do they deliver that effectively?
Well, I think they need to continue the messaging that they have been, that we've identified this, we are looking at it, we are solving it, we have removed people from the voter rolls, we will make sure this doesn't happen again. But it's a message that is not one and done. It's a message that has to keep being given, because there are those out there that want to take advantage of this. They want to create draconian measures to make it so much harder for people to register to vote by this one very statistically insignificant error. So I think it's incumbent upon this administration to be talking about this proactively, about the steps that are being taken, about the corrections in the software, about who is going to, if I were in the administration, I would make sure there's somebody at motor vehicle whose job and only job is to make sure that those registered through the motor voter law are not people who are ineligible.
Right. I mean, especially with technology, you would think that the technology would exist when you're, taking certain steps that would immediately not even give them the option to ask that question, right?
Yeah, I think we become slaves to technology. We certainly, especially with the advances of artificial intelligence, start to believe and behave in ways that if we feed an algorithm into a machine, it's going to do the critical thinking for us. And there is no, substitute for a human eye on the registrations, making sure that they're done correctly. You can use all the computer technology you want, but at the end of the day, government is about people being elected to make decisions on the benefit and on behalf of the citizens of the state of New Jersey.
Well, you have some legislators that want to have an investigation, a bipartisan investigation, an audit. Some are asking about subpoena power. What do you think about that? Should the governor support that type of, if it's a bipartisan, independent probe, or is internal and executive action, is that enough to restore trust?
Well, I think that executive action could be enough, but again, full transparency is important here. We did a bipartisan, bicameral panel on Bridgegate, equal number of Democrats and Republicans on a panel to investigate the Christie administration. That could be a model of looking at this. That has subpoena power to ask all of the tough, difficult questions and get answers. But I think that doing that is going to further ensure that the voters have that kind of confidence that this administration is being very transparent, fixing the problem and moving forward so that it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, so let's, again, so how should the governor balance, again, acknowledging the error, defending the integrity of the system with, we have New Jersey, we've joked about this in the past. Its nickname shouldn't be necessarily Garden State, but the election state, right? Because there's always an election. This year, federal elections, next year, state elections. So that, and we have so many ways to vote now. Vote by mail, early voting, in-person voting the day of. And there is so much that the Secretary of State does oversee to where you can track your ballot. It feels like there are so many safeguards, and not safeguards, but there are so many things in place to where you can track and ways to be able to access voting. But it doesn't take a lot for people to get really feeling uneasy and really, especially with, a couple of elections that we're going to have that are going to be they're being watched at the national level. They are districts, New Jersey's seventh congressional district, those areas could easily flip. So how do you look at that with the future elections approaching?
Well, I think, our election system, most people's encounter with it is filling out a vote by mail ballot or going to the polls on election day. And beyond that, for most people in the state of New Jersey, the back end of that system is invisible. They don't know about it. There are 21 counties in New Jersey. Each one has a county board of elections, which has an equal number of Democrats and Republicans on that board that administer the election. So there's nobody going to get a partisan advantage in front of one of those boards because they're equally divided between Democrats and Republicans. You have 21 county clerks who are the chief election administration officials, setting up the ballots, collecting the data on election day. And then you have all of the municipal clerks throughout the state, Democrat appointed municipal clerks, Republican appointed municipal clerks, and then the poll workers, bipartisan, Democrats and Republicans sitting at each polling station administering the election. It is a very distributed system. It is really, really difficult in any sense for anybody to manipulate that system. And so people need to take comfort in the fact that there are many eyes watching how these ballots are issued, how they're counted, who's maintaining the lists. And so there's already a very robust, transparent system that people, frankly, aren't very familiar with. I think one of the things that I would do if I were back in government right now is to make sure that people know about that level of detail, that they know that there are so many eyes watching the system, that there are so many people on a bipartisan basis counting the votes, creating the ballots, managing the elections, that there is in New Jersey and elsewhere throughout this country, because New Jersey's system is not truly unique, that it is a very robust, redundant, well-observed system that is really hard to manipulate.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk. Always a pleasure to see you.
Thanks for having me on. Yeah, good to see you again. Thank you.
And that'll do it for today. I'm Laura Jones. Thanks so much for watching New Jersey Politics. We look forward to seeing you back here next time.